So I'm back to do more cards from the Arcane Maelstorm. So last time I said I was gonna start on the Planeswalker. This one happens to be Jace archetype of thought. It's a Jace legendary Planeswalker that starts with 4 loyalty counters and costs 2 and 2 islands. And I think legendary planeswalkers can be commanders, but obviously where it's blue, you could only make that legendary planeswalker. In this case, the commander for a blue deck. The first ability is +1 until end of your next turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls attacks, it gets -1, -0 until end of turn. So basically, the plus ability is just lowering the attack power of a creature your opponent controls by a single attacking point. The second ability is -2, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other pile on the bottom of your library in any order. The third ability is a -8. For each player, search that player's library for a non-land card and exile it. Then that player shuffles their library. You may cast those cards without paying their mana cost. So -8, the ultimate for Jace archetype of thought is decent because you get to basically exile something from your opponent's library and cast it for free. So if you have something to put counters on planeswalkers, if you use a proliferate ability, you can get to that ultimate faster because you have to have at least that many loyalty counters to be able to use it. You start at 4, you need to get up at least 8, but if you have 8 and use the -8, you would kill it off. So ideally you would want to get to 9 to -8, leaving it with at least 1 loyalty counter. Lunar Mystic. It's a 2/2 human wizard for 2 and 2 islands. Whenever you cast an instant spell, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. Blue is sort of known for drawing cards. That's maybe mid to late game. If you have a lot of mana, you pay 1 to draw a card. You might be low on cards in your hand, so drawing a card for each spell you're playing mid to late game would be helpful. Nibbles of Frost. It's a 3/3 spirit for 2 and 2 islands. It has flying and prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, tap target creature an opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap stage. So, potentially some fun. This guy's getting +1/+1 whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and you're also tapping an opponent's creature if you play an instant or sorcery. So gets bigger and has at least one less blocker. Swarm Intelligence. It's an enchantment for 6 and an island. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, converted mana cost of 7 is a lot, but you're copying each spell each instant or sorcery you play, you copying and choosing new targets. So that does get very entertaining very quick depending on the deck. Taren Sky Summoner. It's a 2/2 merfolk wizard for 2 and 2 islands. It's a legendary creature, so it could be a commander, but where it only has islands in the mana cost, it would only be good for like a blue commander, a mono blue deck. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcerer spell, create a 2/2 blue drake creature token with flying. So in addition to playing stuff in this deck that copies, and makes new copies of the spell, you can also potentially make some tokens off casting your spells. Chaos Warp. It's an instant for 2 and a mountain. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. So, potentially getting rid of something annoying your opponent has to potentially put something else on the battlefield, or maybe putting like a small creature that doesn't do much on your side into your library to hopefully get something better out onto the library. Could really go either way depending on how the play field looks. Charmbreaker Devil. It's a 4/4 devil. At the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or a sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Charmbreaker Devil gets +4/+0 until end of turn. So 6 might be a decent amount of mana, converted mana cost, but you're also getting something back, an instant or sorcerer back from your graveyard to your hand each of your upkeeps, and your 4/4 is becoming an 8/4 if you cast a instant or sorcery, and it actually you could potentially is +4/+0 for each instant or sorcery, so it could potentially even be more power than 8, depending on how many spells you're playing each turn. Maelstorm cost X and 2 mounds, and it's an instant. Multi-kicker for 1. You may pay an additional 1 any number of times as you cast the spell. Choose any target, then choose another target for each time the spell was kicked. Maelstorm deals X damage to each of them. So let's say X was 10, and then you kick the spell 3 times. You're dealing 10 damage to 3 different targets. So later in the game, that really becomes a good card. Commune with Lava. It's another instant that costs X and 2 mounds. Exile the top X cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Could go either way on this card. You're exiling stuff, but then you're able to play it, but only within this short window of time of until your next turn. So I guess it depends on how much mana you have on the battlefield. Dual Caster Mage. It's a 2/2 human wizard for 1 and 2 mountains. It has flash. When Dual Caster Mage enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Itali Primal Storm. It's a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur. That costs 4 and 2 mountains. It happens to be a legendary creature, so you could use it for commander, but where it only has red in the casting cost, you could only use it for commander in a mono red deck. Whenever Itali Primal Storm attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So, you're exiling stuff from, the top of everyone's library, and then potentially playing, the cards if it's not a land. Goblin Dark Dwellers. It's a 4/4 Goblin for 3 and 2 mountains. Has Menace. When Goblin Dark Dwellers enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into the graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So kind of cool where you're playing an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, for an extra time. You do have to exile it, but small price to pay to basically cast a instant or sorcery for that would normally cost 3 or less for free from your graveyard. So has its trade-off. Starstorm. It's another instant for X and 2 mountains. Starstorm deals X damage to each creature, and it has cycling 3, pay 3, discard this card to draw a card. Strength of the Tajaru. It's an instant that costs X and 2 forest, and it has a multi-kicker 1. You may pay an additional 1 any number of times as you cast a spell. Choose target creature, then choose another target creature for each time this spell was kicked. Put X1 counters on each of them. So if X is 10 and you happen to kick it 5 times, you're putting 10 1/1 counters on up to 5 creatures. So fun in the later game, look at all these, 5/5s and 6/6s. Yeah, let's give them some 10/10 plus 10 plus 10 because of, the counters. Artifact Mutation. It's an instant that costs a mountain and a forest. Destroy target artifact. It can't be regenerated. Create X 1/1 green sapling creature tokens where X is that artifact's converted mana cost. So not only are you getting rid of someone's artifact, you're also getting a handful of tokens equal to the mana cost of that artifact. Illuminatus. It's a 3/5 Djinn that costs 5. Island or a mountain, and then another island or a mountain. has flying. Each instant and sorcery spell you cast has replicate. The replicate cost is equal to its mana cost. When you cast it, copy it for each time you paid its replicate cost. You may choose new targets for the copies. So, if you have something that costs 3, an instant or sorcery that costs 3, the replicate cost would be 3. So you tap 3, you play the original instant or sorcery. If you have open mana, you pay another 3 to essentially cast it again as you're playing the original spell. Mellick is a Paragon. It's a 2/4 weird wizard that costs 4, an island, and a mountain. It happens to be a legendary creature, so if you had a Izzet deck, I think it's called, a blue-red deck, this could be a commander for that particular deck if you wanted. Play it as a top card of your library revealed. You may cast instant and sorcery spells from the top of your library. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your library, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, potentially helpful if you have no cards in hand or very few, and what you have in your hand aren't great. You can cast a spell from the top of your library, and spells cast from the top of your library you're basically copying, so that's pretty cool. Propedic Bolt. It's an instant for 3, an island, and a mountain. Propedic Bolt deals 4 damage to any target. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. Put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So it deals damage and you get 1 card to your hand for out of the top 4. So deal damage and draw a card. Rajmi Eternity's Crafter. It's a 2/3 elf druid for 2, a forest, and an island. Happens to be a legendary creature, so it could be a commander, but only for a green-blue deck. Whenever you cast your first spell, each turn reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell's, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast the reveal card, put it into your hand. So you're potentially casting another spell if the mana cost is less than the first spell you cast, and if you can't cast it, you're putting it into your hand. So you're either casting another spell for free or you're drawing a card. Wart the Raid Mother. It's a 3/3 Goblin Shaman for 4, a mountain or a forest, and another mountain or a forest. Happens to be a legendary creature, so could be a commander, but only for a red-green deck. When Wart the Raid Mother enters the battlefield, create 2/1/1 red and green Goblin Warrior creature tokens. Each red or green instant or sorcery spell you cast has Conspire. As you cast the spell, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control that share a color with it. When you do, copy it, and you may choose new targets for that copy. So you can For your red or green instants and sorceries, you can um, tap some creatures like you would for Convoke, but you know, instead of using it to play a spell, you're using it to play a copy of a spell you just played. A second copy. Solomon similar term. I probably butchered that name. It's a 2/2 golem that costs 4. When Solomon Simulacrum enters a battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. When Solomon Simulacrum dies, you may draw a card. So, enters the battlefield, searches and puts a basic land on the battlefield, so it thins your deck a little bit. When it dies, it draws a card for you, so obviously helpful, both enter the battlefield and dying triggers. Cinder, glade. It's a land, and on the line that tells you that's a land, it says mountain forest, so you could search for this particular dual land as if you were searching for a basic land where it lists both types of, you can tap for a mountain or a forest. Cinder Glade enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Desolate Lighthouse. It's a land that you can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 1 a island and a mountain, tap, draw a card, then discard a card. One of those very few non-basic lands that's not entering tapped, but you're not tapping it for a particular color, it's tapping for colorless, and the other ability you're actually paying mana and tapping it to draw a card and discard a card. So I guess they felt it wasn't necessary to do enter the battlefield tapped like a lot of other non-basics. Exotic Orchard. It's a land, tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. Whereas this is a blue-green red deck, you obviously have other lands that would let you get either blue, red, or green. But if you're playing against a black-white deck, you could tap this particular land for either black or white. Not sure why you would need that where this commander deck is only red, blue, green, unless you somehow took one of your opponent's cards to then play it. That maybe you would need your opponent's colors. Kessig Wolf Run. It's a land card that taps for a colorless, or you can pay X red or X a forest and a mountain. Tap. Target creature gets +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. So kind of cool. You could either contribute the colorless amount towards playing something, or you can boof up a creature by paying X and 2 different colors to give it +X. You're like, oh hey, I'm gonna pay 10 and this guy gets +10/+0 and trample until end of turn. That with trample, that could be a game changer. All of a sudden a 5/5 is a 15/5 with trample, and maybe you're hitting for 10 of that 15 maybe, where the defense isn't going up, your guy may or may not die, but you're trampling over for 10, so it's worth it, maybe. Mossfire Valley, it's a land that you can pay 1 and tap it to add a mountain and a forest. So basically you're paying 1 mana to produce 2 mana, but it's 1 mana of one color and 1 mana of another color. Mosswort Bridge, it's a land. Hideaway, this land enters the battlefield tapped. When it does, look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, then put the rest on the bottom of your library. Tap to add a forest, or pay a forest and tap. You may play the exile card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have a total power of 10 or greater. So kind of an interesting way of sneaking in a card depending on what it is. You're paying just a forest and tapping a land to potentially be playing one of your cards that could be 5 or 6 mana maybe, or you could get bad luck and just be playing one of your low mana costs, because it's luck of the draw what's in the top 4 of your library. You're picking one of those cards. Oren, Wreath, the Vastwood, it's a land. Oren, Wreath, the Vastwood enters the battlefield tapped. Tap to add a forest, or tap to put a 1/1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So that's kind of cool that you can potentially boof up your green creatures. Scavenger Grounds, it's a land desert. Tap to add a colorless, or pay 2, tap, sacrifice a desert, exile all cards from all graveyards. So obviously double-edged sword, you're exiling cards from your graveyard, but at the same time you're exiling cards from your opponent's graveyard, so they can't bring stuff back from their graveyards, they can't play spells from their graveyards, they can't in any way benefit from having stuff in their graveyards. So kind of one of those give and take cards. Yavam Coast, it's a land. Tap to add a colorless, or tap to add a blue, or tap to add a forest or island. Yama Coast deals 1 damage to you. So colorless, not doing anything. If you try to tap it for either the blue or green mana, it's doing a single damage, but if you don't have one of those colors and you're playing this early on, that 1 damage is small change. Actually looks like we had more basic land here. This was 3 more mountains, which earlier I had only seen 2, so this means I think it was either green or blue had 5, and now red has 5, and then the other color had 8. I don't remember whether it was blue or green had 8 and one of them had 5. Bonder's Ornament, it's an artifact that costs 3. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. Pay 4, tap. Each player who controls a permanent named Bonder's Ornament draws a card. So, you're basically paying 4 and tapping to draw a card. Not the best way to draw a card, but if you have no cards or only a couple cards, maybe it gets you what you need. Arcane Signet. It's an artifact that costs 2, tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's identity. Commander's Spear. It's an artifact that costs 3, tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's identity. Sacrifice Commander's Spear, draw a card. So, kind of similar cards. The Commander's Spear costs 1 more, but also has the ability to sacrifice to draw a card, so slightly better, but do similar things. Lightning Reeves. It's an artifact equipment that costs 2 to cast to the battlefield. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. It can't be the target of spells or abilities. The equip cost is 0, so artifact equipments are kind of like enchanted creatures, except you can play them to the battlefield. You don't have to enchant a creature right away. And where there's an equip cost, you pay to put it on the battlefield, then pay to put it from the battlefield onto a creature. In this case, the equip cost is 0, so you can, if you want to, same turn, basically just put it on a creature instead of battlefield then creature. Soul Ring. This is fairly common along commander decks. It's an artifact that costs 1, and you tap to get 2 colorless, which may or may not seem broken because you're paying 1 to get 2 mana. Clash of Titans. It's an instant that costs 3 and 2 mountains. Target creature fights another target creature. Each deals damage equal to its power to the other. Channeled Force. It's an instant that costs 2, an island and a forest. As an additional cost to cast a spell, discard X cards. Target player draws X cards. Channeled Force deals X damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. Kind of one of those double-edged swords cards again. You're discarding cards, but if they're cards that aren't helpful in some way or shape or form, or are just worth discarding, you're having someone draw cards, plus you're also doing damage to 1 target creature or planeswalker, so kind of a trade-off, I guess. Primal Empathy. It's a enchantment for 1 forest and an island. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. If you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. Otherwise, put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control. So, it's a nice cheap enchantment that rewards you by either drawing a card or putting a 1/1 counter on a creature to boof it up. Psychic Impetus. It's an enchantment, aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. It attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, you scry 2. So could go either way. You're boofing a creature where it's commander. There's potentially more than 2 players, so you can put it on your creature, or you could put it on another player's creature. If you put it on someone else's creature, it's basically saying, not only does it have to attack, if able, it has to attack a player other than you. So, you could put it on a second player's creature, and it would have to attack the third player instead of attacking you if you're playing with 3 or more. So, really could go either way. Shiny Impetus. It's an enchantment aura that costs 2 in the mountain. Enchanted creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. It attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, you create a treasure token. It's an artifact with sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color. Predatory Impetus. Again, it's a enchanted aura. This one costs 4 in the forest. Enchanted creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3. Must be blocked if able, and is goaded. It attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. So kind of interesting how they have 1 for each color of each of the 3 colors you're playing. Chemister Insight. It's an instant that costs 3 in an island. Draw 2 cards. Jumpstart. You may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to playing its other card. Then exile this card. Frantic Search. It's an instant for 2 in an island. Draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Untap up to 3 lands. So, the only downside is you're discarding 2 cards, but if you have cards in hand anyway that you aren't playing, you're basically drawing 2 cards and untapping the lands that you use to play this to then get rid of 2 cards that you may or may not use, to potentially get something you might use. Murmuring Mystic. It's a 1/5 human wizard that costs 3 in an island. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcerer spell, create a 1/1 bluebird illusion token with flying. So with how many instant sorceries there are, depending on when this guy is played, you're potentially getting a handful of 1/1 flying tokens. Whiplash Trap. It's an instant trap that costs 3 and 2 islands. If an opponent had 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under their control this turn, you may pay an island rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Return 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. So, if an opponent casts 2 or more creatures this turn, you can cast it on their turn because it's an instant, and then pay a single island instead of 3 and 2 islands, and then return 2 creatures to their hand. So if they have stuff you don't want to deal with, maybe they have 2 big guys that could block, return those to your hand. Surreal, memoir. It's a sorcery for 3 in a mountain. Return an instant card at random from your graveyard to your hand. Has a rebound. It has rebound. If you cast a spell from your hand, exile it as it resolves. As at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. Crop rotation. It's an instant that costs a forest. As additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a land. Search your library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So cost 1 and sacrificing a land to search for a land. Kind of sucks having to sacrifice a land, but if you have the wrong colors out, you can sacrifice 1 to get the correct color for something you have in your hand, maybe. Evolution Charm. It's an instant for 1 in a forest. Choose 1. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Or return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Or target creature gains flying until end of turn. Harrow. It's an instant for 2 in a forest. As additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So again, like the one a few cards ago, kind of sucks sacrificing a land, but if you have the wrong color, potentially helpful. Hunter's Insight. It's an instant for 2 in a forest. Choose target creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. So, kind of interesting. Green has something that lets you draw cards, but it's, when combat damage is done to a player or planeswalker, so it kind of involves attacking, which green is kind of somewhat a creature-based color, it seems like. Hunting Pack. It's an instant for 5 and 2 forests. Create a 4/4 beast creature token. Storm. When you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before this turn. So not only are you getting a 4/4 beast token, but depending on how many spells you cast before this, you're potentially getting 2 or 3 or 4 if it's later in the game and you have a lot of mana. Natural Connection. It's an instant for 2 in a forest. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. No sacrificing a land, but the land that's entering the battlefield is entering tap, so kind of one of those trade-off things that you don't have one consequence, so you have a different consequence, I guess. Slice and Twain. It's an instant for 2 and 2 forest. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Draw a card. So kind of cool. In addition to destroying something, you get to draw a card. Tribute to the Wild. It's an instant for 1 in a forest. Each opponent sacrifices an artifact or an enchantment. So a little bit cheaper to deal with a artifact or enchantment. The downside is the opponent sacrificing it, so they kind of have the choice in which one whereas the last one, it says destroy target, so you're choosing for the other one, where this one, your opponent is. Wilderness Reclamation. It's an enchantment that costs 3 in the forest. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. So that's pretty powerful. You basically go and play whatever you want on your turn. In the turn, untap your lands, and then you have mana to play instants on your opponent's turn, or if you have something that lets you play sorcery cards as if they were an instant, you could do that. If you have something that has flash, which I think one or two of the creatures in this deck had flash, I can't remember which ones though. Crackling Drake. It's a star 4 Drake that is flying. Crackling Drake's power is equal to the total number of instants and sorcery cards you own in Exile and in your graveyard. When Crackling Drake enters the battlefield, draw a card. So, where this deck has a lot of instants and sorceries, this guy, right off, early on in the game, might not have too high of power, but if, mid to late game, 10, 12, 15 for its power because of how many instants and sorceries you play throughout the game. Cost 2 islands and 2 mountains, so kind of interesting casting costs, but you have enough land throughout the deck to potentially play that. Growth Spiral, so it's an instant for a forest and an island. Draw a card. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Kind of what I would expect out of a blue-green instant, draw, and allows essentially an additional land to be played, because you can play one per turn unless the card specifies that you can play an additional land. So that's sort of helpful in Commander. Timur Charm it's an instant that costs a forest, island, and a mountain. Choose one. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. Or counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Or creatures with power 3 or less can't block this turn. Kind of an interesting card, but depending on battlefield state and whatnot, one of those 3 options might be more beneficial than other. And a random card at the back that tells you to basically go to the learnmtg.wizards.com to kind of discover more about Magic. The flip side gives you popular Magic formats. I mean, these cards aren't actually part of the deck, but if you make non-conventional tokens and print them out on regular paper, you could put these behind the creature token and then put the creature token on the printer paper in front of this, and it could be a alternative token to whatever the normal zombie token or sapling token or whatever it is, just an alternate art maybe. So hopefully you found this somewhat interesting, and keep checking back for other Magic videos and other computer video game videos. Thanks, and have a good day.